The Lagos courtroom was alive with tension, the polished wood reflecting the harsh midday sun streaming through tall windows, casting long lines across the floor, each line a silent marker of power, influence, and intent. Adedeo Okafor adjusted his tie, eyes scanning the gallery filled with journalists, legal aides, and spectators hungry for drama. Today's case was more than a legal battle. It was a chessboard of ambition, ethics, and deception, a collision of intellects. Across the room, Nneka Adebayo, his adversary, moved with calculated grace, her heels clicking against the marble, the perfect embodiment of poise, intelligence, and unrelenting competitiveness. She looked at him and smiled faintly, a gesture both conciliatory and provocative, a reminder that this courtroom was her domain as much as it was his. The judge entered, robes flowing, presence commanding, and silence fell like a heavy curtain. Adedeo rose, acknowledging the court with measured respect, every movement a study in discipline and calculated charm. He had prepared for months, dissected every legal precedent, every loophole, every potential misstep of Nneka's strategy. Yet, he knew that preparation alone could not secure victory. The game was as much psychological as it was procedural. The first witness, a senior corporate officer, approached the stand, documents in hand, testimony rehearsed but vulnerable to interrogation. Adedeo's opening cross-examination was surgical, questions precise, tone neutral but edged with authority, designed to expose inconsistencies while maintaining a facade of civility. Nneka countered with equal mastery, her questions weaving narratives, highlighting moral ambiguities, drawing attention to gaps in corporate oversight, and planting seeds of doubt among the jurors. The gallery shifted subtly with every exchange, murmurs of admiration and surprise spreading like ripples across a pond. Adedeo felt the pressure but thrived under it. Every challenge, every objection, every pause was an opportunity to assert dominance and reveal hidden truths. He noticed subtle shifts in Nneka's expression, micro-tremors in her confidence, and he capitalized, threading a web of logic that forced the witness to contradict prior statements, creating cracks in the opposing narrative. As the day progressed, evidence unfolded like a tightly wound mystery. Emails, contracts, voice recordings, and financial records painted a labyrinth of corporate negligence, ambition, and betrayal. Adedeo presented them methodically, connecting dots that seemed innocuous but revealed a pattern of mismanagement that implicated executives across multiple layers. Nneka responded with sharp counterpoints, invoking procedural technicalities, ethical nuances, and appeals to higher principles, challenging the jury to question not only the facts but the interpretation of those facts. Adedeo recognized the elegance of her strategy, admired it, and simultaneously prepared his response, aware that anticipation and adaptability would determine the outcome more than rote memorization of law. During a brief recess, Adedeo reviewed his notes in the anteroom, a cup of coffee steaming beside him, and reflected on the human elements interwoven in the case: greed, loyalty, desperation, pride, and fear. Each juror carried their own biases, each witness had vulnerabilities, and every move in the courtroom could tip the scales. He mapped scenarios in his mind. If Nneka introduced an unexpected piece of evidence, if the judge questioned the admissibility of a critical document, if a key witness faltered under pressure. His calculations were meticulous, balancing logic and intuition, knowledge and perception. When the session resumed, Nneka introduced a surprise witness, a former employee with first-hand experience of the alleged negligence. Adedeo's pulse quickened slightly, not from fear but from the thrill of challenge. He approached the cross-examination with surgical precision, uncovering discrepancies, revealing motivations, and gently guiding the witness to truths that favored his argument without appearing manipulative. The gallery leaned forward, captivated by the verbal duel unfolding, a symphony of intellect and strategy. Hours passed in relentless exchanges, objections, counterarguments, and strategic pauses. The judge intervened sparingly, her presence a constant reminder that law, though rigorous, was administered by humans influenced by nuance, persuasion, and charisma. Adedeo and Nneka danced across the stage of intellect, each anticipating, countering, and subtly undermining the other, aware that perception often outweighed fact, and presentation could shape interpretation. The case transcended mere corporate negligence. It became a study of human psychology, ethics, and the fine line between justice and manipulation. As the day drew to a close, Adedayo presented his closing argument, voice steady, eyes scanning the jury, weaving facts into a coherent narrative of responsibility, accountability, and moral obligation. He framed the story not only in legal terms but human terms, emphasizing consequences for individuals, organizations, and the broader society. Necker countered with elegance, crafting a narrative that questioned interpretation, intent, and fairness, leaving the jury suspended in a delicate balance between evidence and persuasion. After final statements, the judge adjourned the session with instructions for deliberation, the gavel striking like a heartbeat across the courtroom. Adedayo exited into the corridor, a blend of relief and anticipation washing over him, knowing that the next 24 hours would determine victory or defeat, reputation or infamy. Necker followed, her composure unshaken, a faint smile signaling respect, rivalry, and the promise of future battles. As Lagos glittered outside the courthouse, the city unaware of the private wars fought within, Adedayo understood that in law, as in life, every advantage counted, every observation mattered, and even a small miscalculation could unravel months of strategy, influence, and ambition. The next morning, Adedayo Okafor arrived at the courthouse early, the sun barely cutting through the morning haze over Lagos Island, the city stretching like a living organism beneath him. Lawyers, clerks, journalists, and onlookers moved with a rhythm that only Lagos could generate, each step a note in a complex symphony of ambition and observation. Adedayo's mind was already calculating every argument from yesterday, every subtle reaction from the jury, every micro-expression from Necker, each detail stored and analyzed. Today, the case would escalate into a stage where patience, psychology, and ruthless logic mattered more than precedent. Necker Adebayo entered shortly after, her polished black suit sharp, her heels clicking against marble like deliberate punctuation. She acknowledged him with a nod that conveyed both challenge and mutual respect, a silent statement that today's battle would test intellect, strategy, and endurance. The courtroom filled quickly, the atmosphere electric, anticipation hanging like static. The judge entered, her robes flowing, her presence a measured command that drew silence like gravity. Adedayo rose, nodded, and returned to his seat, the tension in his shoulders masking an internal readiness. The first witness was a senior operations manager whose testimony could tilt the case either way. Adedayo's opening questions were precise, exposing minor contradictions while subtly reinforcing credibility, his tone neutral but edged with authority. Necker countered, redirecting the narrative with questions designed to probe motives, emphasize ambiguity, and hint at unseen pressures in the corporate structure. Every pause, every inflection, every hesitant glance became material, and Adedayo exploited them like a sculptor shaping perception. By mid-morning, documents that had been considered routine took on new significance. Emails between executives revealed subtle conflicts of interest, contracts highlighted clauses open to interpretation, and a financial ledger suggested discrepancies that, while minor individually, painted a broader picture of negligence when combined. Adedayo and Necker volleyed over these pieces like seasoned chess players, predicting moves, countering assumptions, and weaving narratives that framed the evidence in contrasting lights. Jurors shifted in their seats, absorbing each verbal strike and counterstrike, the human element blending with legal procedure to form an unpredictable dance. During a recess, Adedayo reviewed the day's developments in a small anteroom, the city noises filtering faintly through tall windows. He noted that the jury's reactions to Necker's cross-examinations were mixed, some skeptical, some impressed. He mapped out how to adjust tomorrow's approach, considering tone, framing, and the subtle integration of additional documents. Aisha, acting as his informal advisor and confidant, emphasized that perception, subtlety, and timing mattered as much as facts. They planned contingencies for surprise evidence, potential witness hesitancy, and any attempt by Necker to manipulate emotional responses. The human mind, they agreed, was the battlefield as much as the courtroom itself. Afternoon proceedings introduced a surprise. A whistleblower from within the company stepped forward, offering testimony that contradicted prior statements from executives. Adideo approached the witness carefully, building rapport, validating statements, then guiding responses to reveal inconsistencies that subtly aligned with his narrative of negligence and accountability. Necker's response was instantaneous, redirecting the testimony to highlight ethical dilemmas and unintended consequences, framing the company's missteps as systemic rather than individual failings. The gallery leaned forward, captivated by this verbal duel, each exchange a mixture of logic, persuasion, and psychological strategy. The judge interjected intermittently, clarifying procedural points, ensuring the courtroom remained disciplined, yet leaving space for the strategic sparring between Adideo and Necker to unfold. Every word from the bench was analyzed, every gesture noted, and every pause catalogued in the minds of the participants. Adideo recognized that mastery of law alone was insufficient. Anticipating human behavior, leveraging subtle bias, and manipulating perception were equally crucial. Late afternoon saw the introduction of a new set of documents: internal emails revealing executive panic, attempts to cover errors, and conflicting reports about operational compliance. Adideo integrated them seamlessly into his narrative, emphasizing accountability, responsibility, and the consequences of negligence. Necker countered with arguments emphasizing context, highlighting pressures, and framing errors as inadvertent rather than malicious, forcing jurors to balance facts with ethical interpretation. The tension in the room was palpable. Each statement, glance, and counterpoint heightened suspense, creating a narrative that was both intellectual and emotionally charged. By evening, both lawyers moved to their closing statements, aware that their rhetoric could shape perceptions as much as the evidence itself. Adideo framed responsibility as a moral and legal obligation, tying corporate oversight to societal consequences and human cost. Necker emphasized fairness, intent, and nuance, suggesting that the jury's understanding required both empathy and logic. Jurors sat in rapt attention, processing layers of strategy, interpretation, and persuasion. Outside, Lagos glimmered in the dying sun, oblivious to the intense, cerebral battle taking place within its courthouse. After adjournment, Adideo lingered in the corridor, reviewing notes, anticipating tomorrow's moves, and noting subtle cues from jurors and court staff. Necker passed, offering a brief smile that suggested respect and acknowledgement of a shared gain. Each knew this was far from over. Tomorrow's sessions would test endurance, innovation, and psychological acuity. As night descended, Adideo reflected on the stakes: justice, reputation, and the fragile human elements that intertwined with law. Lagos' heartbeat continued outside, relentless, vibrant, and indifferent to the private wars shaping the lives of those inside the courthouse walls. The morning sun cast long, warm rays through the courthouse windows, glinting off polished wood and reflecting the tension in the air. Adideo Okafor entered early, briefcase in hand, meticulously reviewing his notes, each page a map of strategy, each annotation a weapon in the battle ahead. Today's session promised escalation: new witnesses, undisclosed documents, and legal maneuvers that could pivot the case in unexpected directions. Necker Adideo arrived shortly after, her presence commanding attention, black suit sharp, heels clicking like deliberate punctuation. Her gaze met Adideo's for a fleeting moment, a silent exchange of challenge and respect, a recognition that today would test intellect, patience, and psychological agility. The courtroom filled quickly. Journalists, clerks, and spectators whispered, anticipating the unfolding drama. The judge entered, robes flowing, the gavel strike setting the rhythm of proceedings. The first witness was a mid-level executive who had recently resigned under circumstances clouded by ambiguity. Adideo approached the stand with precision, questions carefully structured to reveal inconsistencies without appearing combative, to draw subtle admissions while maintaining professional decorum. Necker countered effortlessly, guiding the witness through ethical interpretations, situational pressures, and moral nuance, forcing the jury to balance facts with human complexity. The tension was palpable, every word and gesture magnified in the minds of all present, each exchange a duel of intellect and perception. Mid-morning brought the introduction of internal communications, encrypted emails, and time-stamped memos that suggested discrepancies in project oversight and operational compliance. Adedeo highlighted patterns, connecting seemingly minor details into a coherent narrative of responsibility and oversight. Necker dissected the same documents, reframing the narrative to emphasize procedural ambiguity, mitigating factors, and systemic pressures. The courtroom became a theater of layered arguments, where intellect, psychology, and strategic presentation were wielded as weapons. Observers leaned forward, captivated by the elegance and intensity of the verbal sparring. During a brief recess, Adedeo retreated to the anteroom, reviewing micro-expressions observed in the jury, subtle reactions from clerks, and faint but telling glances from Necker. He recognized the human element as critical. Perception often outweighed fact, and influence could pivot the case more than evidence alone. Aisha, acting as confidant and advisor, emphasized that tomorrow's session would require anticipating surprises, subtle manipulations of narrative flow, and precise emotional calibration in responses. Every movement, every tone, every pause could become material, and their strategy had to integrate both intellect and intuition flawlessly. Returning after recess, the session escalated. A surprise witness emerged, a whistleblower from a mid-tier department, claiming first-hand knowledge of procedural negligence. Adedeo approached with a calculated mix of empathy and authority, guiding testimony toward verifiable facts while subtly exposing inconsistencies in prior statements. Necker countered instantly, highlighting pressures, unintentional oversights, and ethical ambiguity, reframing the narrative as one of complexity rather than negligence. The gallery reacted, murmurs of intrigue and admiration rippling through the room, the case evolving from mere legality to a high-stakes psychological chess match. By mid-afternoon, evidence evolved further, detailed project reports, financial audits, and operational logs, each with potential to shift perception. Adedeo integrated them into his narrative, emphasizing accountability and responsibility without seeming overly aggressive. Necker challenged interpretations, emphasizing context, intent, and the broader systemic pressures that shape decisions, forcing jurors to weigh morality against legality. Every statement, gesture, and pause became a tactical consideration. The courtroom transformed into a battlefield of intellect, strategy, and subtle manipulation. As tension mounted, a confidential message was discreetly passed to Adedeo. Additional financial discrepancies had been uncovered, suggesting previously unknown internal conflicts among executives. This revelation demanded immediate recalibration, integrating new evidence seamlessly without betraying the reactive nature of discovery. Adedeo subtly adjusted his approach, weaving the information into testimony and cross-examinations, ensuring the narrative of oversight and accountability remained coherent and persuasive. Late afternoon saw both lawyers deliver extended, high-stakes arguments. Adedeo presented a logical sequence, connecting facts, evidence, and human responsibility into a compelling narrative of ethical and legal accountability. Necker countered with finesse, highlighting nuance, intent, and interpretive flexibility, creating tension between moral judgment and legal fact. The jury, suspended between conflicting interpretations, leaned forward, acutely aware that every decision required careful consideration of fact, psychology, and strategy. As the day concluded, the judge issued directives for deliberation, adjourned the session, and the gavel's echo lingered like a heartbeat across the courtroom. Outside, Lagos pulsed with its usual chaos, the city oblivious to the cerebral warfare inside. Adedeo stepped into the corridor, reviewing strategies, anticipating Necker's next moves, noting jury reactions, and preparing for the evolving battle. Necker passed him, a faint, knowing smile signaling mutual respect, rivalry, and the anticipation of tomorrow's session. Each knew this was only a stage in an ongoing war of intellect, influence, and strategy, where perception and precision could outweigh evidence, and where loyalty, ambition, and cunning would decide the outcome. The morning light filtered through the tall courthouse windows, scattering reflections across the polished wood, as if each beam carried the weight of anticipation that had gripped Lagos for weeks. Adedeo Okafor arrived early, briefcase in hand, meticulously reviewing his notes, every page a map of strategy, every annotation a weapon sharpened over months of preparation. Today was pivotal. The jury had begun forming impressions, Witnesses had hinted at hidden truths, and Nneka Adebayo had shown both brilliance and subtle aggression that demanded constant vigilance. The courtroom hummed with quiet energy as clerks, journalists, and spectators settled, the air thick with expectation. Nneka entered shortly after, heels clicking against marble with deliberate authority, her gaze meeting Adebayo's briefly, a silent acknowledgement that the game was far from over and stakes had escalated. The session began with a surprise witness, a former compliance officer who had recently resigned under mysterious circumstances, bringing forward documents that contradicted prior statements. Adebayo approached the stand with practiced precision, guiding the testimony carefully, exposing inconsistencies, highlighting omissions, and subtly framing the narrative in favor of corporate accountability without appearing combative. Nneka countered with equal finesse, emphasizing systemic pressures, ethical ambiguities, and the complex human factors that had influenced decisions, forcing the jury to weigh intention alongside fact. Each exchange, each pause, each glance was loaded with meaning, a duel of intellects played out in real time, captivating everyone in the gallery. Mid-morning, Adebayo introduced a series of emails between executives and department heads, revealing miscommunications and conflicting directives that painted a complex picture of oversight. He threaded these into his argument, constructing a narrative of responsibility and consequence. Nneka responded by highlighting mitigating factors, intent, and context, reframing the same documents to suggest human error rather than deliberate negligence. The jury leaned forward, aware that every subtle inflection and gesture influenced perception, making the line between truth and persuasion increasingly fragile. During a brief recess, Adebayo reviewed jury reactions, noting micro-expressions that indicated skepticism, curiosity, or alignment with Nneka's framing. Aisha reminded him that human psychology was as critical as legal procedure, and today's success depended on adapting to subtle cues, anticipating strategic maneuvers, and exploiting the gaps between perception and fact. Adebayo re-evaluated cross-examination plans, prepared contingency arguments, and rehearsed questions that could shift witness testimony subtly while maintaining credibility and composure. Every second counted. Every observation could become a pivotal leverage point. Back in session, a confidential report surfaced, detailing previously undisclosed internal audits and financial reviews. Adebayo incorporated this evidence methodically, revealing patterns that suggested negligence while maintaining a calm, authoritative tone that reinforced credibility. Nneka responded by dissecting methodology, challenging interpretations, and demonstrating the complexity of corporate operations, effectively counterbalancing the emerging narrative. Observers, jurors, and staff watched in quiet awe, captivated by the intelligence, precision, and psychological acumen each lawyer displayed. Afternoon proceedings introduced a surprise twist. A whistleblower anonymously submitted audio recordings implicating middle management in decisions that had led to operational failures. Adebayo used the recordings strategically, guiding witness recollections, verifying statements, and subtly undermining Nneka's counter-narratives. Nneka countered immediately, questioning context, reliability, and intent, painting the recordings as circumstantial rather than definitive. The courtroom was a tense theater, where intellect, timing, and psychological strategy shaped every outcome, leaving jurors suspended in a delicate balance between evidence and interpretation. By late afternoon, both lawyers escalated the intellectual intensity, weaving together narratives, dissecting testimony, and leveraging every observation made over prior sessions. Adebayo highlighted the human and societal consequences of oversight failures, while Nneka emphasized complexity, context, and nuance. Jurors were captivated, realizing that the case transcended law. It was a study in strategy, influence, perception, and moral judgment. Every nuance mattered, and every reaction carried weight. As evening fell, the judge issued instructions for deliberation, reminding the courtroom of the importance of impartiality and careful evaluation. The gavel struck, echoing like a heartbeat across the courthouse, signaling a temporary pause in proceedings. Adebayo stepped into the corridor, reviewing strategies, analyzing jury reactions, and anticipating Nneka's next moves. Nneka passed him silently, offering a subtle nod that conveyed respect, rivalry, and a promise of future confrontation. The city outside sparkled under Lagos lights, oblivious to the cerebral warfare unfolding within its walls, a world where strategy, intellect, and human complexity determined outcomes more than mere rules. The morning light barely penetrated the courthouse windows, yet the tension inside was palpable, thick with anticipation as lawyers, clerks, journalists, and spectators settled into their places. Adedayo Okafor arrived early, briefcase in hand, meticulously reviewing notes, mental maps of strategy etched in his mind like blueprints. Today, he knew, could redefine perceptions, sway undecided jurors, and test the limits of both intellect and endurance. Nneka Adebayo entered soon after, heels clicking deliberately against the marble floor, every movement calculated to exude poise, authority, and quiet confidence. Their eyes met for a fleeting second, a silent acknowledgement of the battle yet to unfold, a mutual recognition that this courtroom was a chessboard and they were the only players. The session opened with a surprise deposition from a former senior project manager, whose testimony promised revelations capable of altering the trajectory of the case. Adedayo approached the witness with precision, guiding answers carefully, exposing minor inconsistencies while maintaining an air of neutrality. Each question was a probe, each pause an invitation, each inflection a subtle nudge toward admissions that could strengthen his narrative. Nneka countered expertly, framing questions that emphasized human error, contextual pressures, and ethical ambiguity, forcing the jury to balance interpretation with fact. Every word, every gesture, every micro-expression became part of the unfolding drama, a duel of intellects that left spectators on the edge of their seats. Mid-morning, a set of confidential internal memos surfaced unexpectedly, detailing prior warnings ignored by mid-level executives and hinting at systemic failures. Adedayo integrated these documents into his argument, crafting a narrative of accountability and ethical responsibility. Nneka dissected them with surgical precision, highlighting procedural loopholes, extenuating circumstances, and intent, reframing the narrative to suggest inadvertent mismanagement rather than negligence. The gallery leaned forward collectively, captivated by the interplay of logic, strategy, and psychological maneuvering, aware that each subtle shift could tip the balance. During a recess, Adedayo reviewed juror reactions meticulously. He noted slight gestures of skepticism, fleeting expressions of doubt, and subtle nods suggesting alignment with his arguments. Aisha, his confidant, reminded him that perception often outweighed evidence, and that the art of anticipation and adaptation would determine the outcome. Every nuance, every observation of human behavior became a strategic asset, each one leveraged in preparation for the next round of testimony. Adedayo mapped contingencies, potential challenges from Nneka, unexpected witness revelations, and how to integrate new evidence seamlessly without appearing reactive. Afternoon proceedings revealed a bombshell. An anonymous whistleblower presented a series of recordings exposing contradictions between executive statements and operational realities. Adedayo used the recordings with precision, guiding witnesses to corroborate the evidence, while maintaining a veneer of impartiality. Nneka countered immediately, emphasizing context, reliability, and intention, reframing the evidence as circumstantial. The courtroom transformed into a theater of intellect, where legal expertise, psychological insight, and persuasive storytelling intersected in real time, leaving jurors suspended between competing narratives. Later, a surprise intervention occurred. A high-ranking regulatory official was called to clarify compliance standards and the implications of oversight failures. Adedayo navigated the testimony carefully, extracting statements that reinforced accountability while avoiding overt antagonism. Nneka, anticipating the strategy, reframed the official's words to highlight procedural complexity and mitigate perceived culpability. Each argument, each counterpoint, each subtle gesture became material, with the jury absorbing the intellectual duel as much as the evidence itself. By late afternoon, both lawyers escalated the intensity. Adedayo's narrative wove together evidence, witness testimony, and the broader consequences of corporate oversight, emphasizing responsibility, moral obligation, and the stakes for the wider society. Nneka responded with precision, highlighting nuance, intent, and situational pressures, forcing the jury to navigate a delicate balance between fact, interpretation, and ethical judgment. The tension in the courtroom was tangible, a living force that pulsed with every word, glance, and pause. As the session drew to a close, the judge issued directives for continued deliberation, the gavel echoing like a heartbeat across the polished floor. Adedeo stepped into the corridor, reviewing strategies, analyzing jury reactions, and anticipating Necker's next moves. Necker passed him, offering a subtle, knowing smile, a combination of respect, rivalry, and acknowledgement that the true battle was far from over. Lagos glittered outside, indifferent to the cerebral warfare inside, unaware that strategy, intellect, and human perception had created a stage where law, psychology, and cunning intertwined to determine outcomes that extended far beyond the courtroom walls. The morning light filtered weakly through the courthouse windows, the city of Lagos awakening in a symphony of horns, voices, and distant music, oblivious to the tension that gripped the courtroom within. Adedeo Okafor arrived early, briefcase in hand, meticulously reviewing notes, every annotation a strategic weapon honed over weeks, every observation from prior sessions catalogued in his mind like precise coordinates. The jurors were beginning to form impressions, subtle biases manifesting in expressions and gestures, and today would test both intellect and endurance. Nneka Adebayo arrived shortly after, heels striking the marble with measured authority, her posture perfect, eyes scanning the room as if absorbing every detail, every nuance. Their gazes met briefly, a clash of intellect and silent recognition that the battles ahead would demand more than mere legal mastery. The session opened with the senior auditor, whose prior reports had been dismissed as minor discrepancies, now brought forward under intense scrutiny. Adedeo approached with calculated precision, guiding answers to reveal overlooked protocols, subtle miscalculations, and internal inconsistencies, all while maintaining an air of measured professionalism. Necker countered with finesse, redirecting testimony to highlight complexity, procedural ambiguity, and human error, compelling the jury to evaluate facts alongside intent and circumstance. Each word, each pause, each micro-expression became a weapon in a duel of intellect and strategy, the courtroom itself a stage where psychology and law interwove seamlessly. By mid-morning, the introduction of internal memos shifted the narrative. Communications between executives, memos of internal concern, and records of ignored warnings provided a rich landscape for argument. Adedeo wove them into a narrative of accountability, demonstrating a pattern of oversight failures and emphasizing ethical responsibility, each document a thread in a tapestry designed to expose negligence. Necker, anticipating the strategy, reframed the documents, emphasizing systemic pressures, mitigating circumstances, and ethical ambiguity, forcing jurors to balance interpretation with fact. Observers in the gallery leaned forward, captivated by the sophistication and subtlety of the duel, acutely aware that the battle extended beyond legal fact into perception, influence, and psychological mastery. During recess, Adedeo analyzed juror reactions in detail. A flicker of doubt here, a subtle nod there, a fleeting frown somewhere else. Aisha reminded him that human behavior could pivot the case as much as any document or testimony. Perception and anticipation were as critical as legal precision. Adedeo adjusted strategy in real time, preparing for surprise evidence, potential witness hesitation, and Necker's likely reframing tactics. Every gesture, every observed emotion, every micro-expression became potential leverage, each one meticulously catalogued and integrated into his evolving plan. Returning to the courtroom, a surprise development escalated proceedings. An anonymous whistleblower presented audio recordings implicating mid-level managers in decisions that contributed to operational lapses. Adedeo navigated the evidence with surgical precision, guiding witness corroboration while framing the recordings as part of a coherent narrative of oversight and accountability. Necker immediately countered, emphasizing context, reliability, and intent, challenging the jury to reconcile evidence with interpretation and procedural ambiguity. The courtroom became a living theater of intellect, persuasion, and strategy, where perception, timing, and psychological insight shaped outcomes as much as facts themselves. Afternoon, proceedings intensified with the introduction of a regulatory consultant. called to clarify compliance frameworks and evaluate deviations. Adideo extracted statements reinforcing the narrative of accountability, maintaining a tone of calm authority that highlighted credibility. Necker countered masterfully, framing the testimony as reflective of procedural complexity and systemic ambiguity, compelling the jury to consider intention, nuance, and context. Every argument, counterpoint, and subtle gesture became a tactical maneuver, the courtroom a battlefield of strategy and psychological acuity. As the day progressed, tension escalated further. Adideo presented visual timelines, charts, and integrated documentation, demonstrating patterns of negligence and lapses in oversight, building a compelling argument linking evidence, human responsibility, and consequence. Necker countered with precise narrative framing, emphasizing context, systemic pressures, and the fallibility of human judgment, forcing the jury to weigh moral, ethical, and procedural dimensions simultaneously. Each statement, glance, and pause added layers to the unfolding psychological chess game, the courtroom a theater of intellect and human perception. Late afternoon revealed a confidential memo highlighting internal conflicts previously unknown, exposing tension between mid-level and senior management. Adideo subtly integrated this revelation into cross-examination, highlighting accountability while maintaining an appearance of controlled, deliberate strategy. Necker immediately anticipated the pivot, reframing the evidence to emphasize systemic ambiguity, organizational pressure, and mitigating circumstances, leaving the jury in suspense between competing interpretations of responsibility, intention, and consequence. As evening fell, both lawyers advanced closing arguments. Adideo's presentation wove together evidence, testimony, and logical inference into a cohesive narrative of ethical responsibility and human consequence, tying each point with precision. Necker countered with finesse, emphasizing nuance, intent, and ethical ambiguity, challenging jurors to reconcile moral judgment with procedural fact. The courtroom vibrated with silent tension. Jurors sat at the intersection of intellect, perception, and persuasion, aware that their understanding of truth and responsibility could be subtly influenced by rhetoric, demeanor, and insight. As the gavel struck for adjournment, echoing like a heartbeat, Adideo exited into the corridor, reviewing strategies, juror reactions, and potential next maneuvers. Necker passed silently, offering a slight, knowing nod, a gesture acknowledging respect, rivalry, and the promise that the true battle was only deepening. Lagos glittered beyond the courthouse windows, indifferent to the cerebral warfare inside, a city alive with chaos, ambition, and indifference, unaware that within these walls strategy, intellect, and human insight were determining outcomes with consequences far beyond legal precedent. The courthouse hummed with quiet tension as Lagos outside roared on, a city of endless motion, where ambition and chaos intertwined, yet inside, the air was thick with anticipation. Adideo Okafor arrived early, briefcase in hand, his mind already racing through contingencies, jury reactions, and potential evidence surprises. Every detail mattered: the angle of sunlight, the arrangement of seating, the faintest twitch on a juror's face. Necker Adebayo entered shortly after, heels echoing with authority, posture perfect, eyes scanning the courtroom like a hawk tracking prey. Their glance met, an unspoken acknowledgement that this was no longer just about law. It was about strategy, perception, and control. The morning began with a surprise witness, a former operations manager whose tenure had been shrouded in controversy. Adideo approached systematically, weaving pointed questions that exposed contradictions in prior statements, highlighting lapses in oversight while maintaining a composed demeanor that reinforced credibility. Necker countered seamlessly, reframing the witness's words, emphasizing context, human error, and procedural complexity. Each answer became a battlefield, every hesitation or inflection a potential opening, leaving jurors suspended between interpretations, their focus razor-sharp, aware that the smallest detail could pivot the outcome. Mid-morning, new documents surfaced, internal communications detailing decisions previously hidden from scrutiny. Emails, memos, and operational logs painted a nuanced picture of competing interests, miscommunications, and strategic missteps. Adedayo crafted these into a narrative of accountability and ethical responsibility, connecting disparate threads into a compelling story of consequence and oversight. Necker responded immediately, dissecting the same documents to highlight systemic pressures, mitigating circumstances, and ambiguous intent, forcing the jury to weigh morality, procedure, and human error simultaneously. The courtroom was transformed into a theater of intellect, where persuasion, strategy, and psychological acuity were as crucial as the documents themselves. During a brief recess, Adedayo scanned the jurors, noting subtle gestures, micro-expressions, and shifts in attention. Every nod, frown, or glance became material for recalibrating strategy. Aisha reminded him that human perception often outweighed facts. Understanding motivations and anticipating reactions could shift a case more than the strongest evidence. He reviewed potential counterarguments from Necker, planned contingencies for surprise testimonies, and rehearsed adaptive strategies, internalizing every possible permutation of courtroom dynamics. Returning to the session, a twist unfolded. A whistleblower presented recordings implicating mid-level managers in procedural oversights. Adedayo integrated them with finesse, guiding witnesses to corroborate the evidence, framing each clip as part of a narrative of systemic accountability. Necker countered swiftly, challenging context, reliability, and intent, reframing the recordings as circumstantial and emphasizing procedural nuance, leaving jurors to navigate a complex interplay between fact, intention, and interpretation. Each word, pause, and glance was now charged with significance, the courtroom a living battlefield of intellect and psychological strategy. Afternoon proceedings escalated as a regulatory consultant was called to testify. Adedayo elicited statements reinforcing ethical responsibility, using careful phrasing to emphasize accountability without seeming aggressive. Necker countered instantly, interpreting the consultant's words as indicative of systemic ambiguity and procedural complexity, compelling jurors to balance facts with interpretation and intention. Every gesture, argument, and counter became a strategic maneuver, the courtroom alive with subtle tensions, unspoken calculations, and psychological dueling. Later, visual evidence and timelines were presented, linking minor lapses to cascading consequences. Adedayo's narrative emphasized cause, effect, and responsibility, painting a vivid tableau of consequence and accountability. Necker reframed the same evidence, emphasizing human error, systemic pressures, and mitigating factors, forcing the jury to weigh ethical dimensions alongside procedural detail. Each juror, consciously or subconsciously, became a participant in a chess match of intellect, perception, and judgment, suspended between competing narratives with profound stakes. Late afternoon, a confidential internal memo revealed unexpected power struggles between middle management and senior executives. Adedayo seized the opportunity, integrating the revelation into cross-examination to reinforce a narrative of accountability, skillfully highlighting oversight failures while appearing measured and deliberate. Necker countered expertly, reframing the memo as indicative of systemic complexity and mitigating pressures, leaving jurors suspended between competing interpretations of intention, responsibility, and consequence. Every subtle gesture, glance, and inflection now carried amplified weight, the tension almost palpable, a living pulse inside the room. As evening descended, closing arguments began. Adedayo synthesized evidence, testimony, and logical inference into a cohesive narrative of human consequence, ethical responsibility, and professional accountability. Each point was interconnected, a meticulous web of cause, effect, and implication, building inexorably toward a powerful conclusion. Necker responded with equal mastery, emphasizing nuance, human complexity, and interpretive ambiguity, challenging jurors to reconcile morality with law, fact with perception, and intention with consequence. The room vibrated with tension. Every observer, from juror to journalist, felt the weight of intellect, strategy, and human insight bearing down. When the gavel finally struck for adjournment, its echo reverberated through the courthouse like a resonant heartbeat. Adedayo stepped into the corridor, reviewing every juror reaction, every subtle behavioral shift, and potential angles for the next session. Necker passed him silently, offering a brief, knowing nod, a gesture acknowledging rivalry, respect, and the promise that the true battle was far from over. Outside, Lagos continued its relentless rhythm, unaware of the cerebral warfare within, a city of noise, light, and chaos, oblivious to the mind's maneuvering strategically within the courthouse, shaping outcomes with consequences far beyond the courtroom walls. The courthouse awoke slowly that morning, sunlight striking the polished floors but unable to pierce the intensity of the room's atmosphere. Adedayo Okafor arrived early, briefcase in hand, mind already cycling through all prior sessions, jury reactions, and possible final maneuvers. Every detail mattered: the angle of light on the evidence, the spacing of jurors, the subtle micro-expressions that could betray thought or bias. Nneka Adebayo entered shortly after, heels echoing sharply, every gesture deliberate, commanding attention without a word. Their eyes met briefly, the tension between intellect, strategy, and unspoken rivalry palpable, signaling that this final day would decide more than just legal outcome. It would decide control, reputation, and mastery of influence. The morning opened with unexpected testimony. A former executive, whose quiet presence carried authority and unspoken insight, took the stand. Adedayo's questioning was precise, almost surgical, drawing out contradictions, lapses in procedure, and patterns of oversight, subtly framing each revelation as part of a larger narrative of accountability. Nneka countered effortlessly, reframing each answer to emphasize context, human fallibility, and the pressures inherent in high-stakes corporate decision-making. Each statement, hesitation, and glance became a battleground, forcing jurors to navigate the complex intersection of morality, intent, and law. Mid-morning brought the revelation of a whistleblower's final submission, documents and emails exposing clandestine decisions and internal conflicts previously unknown. Adedayo incorporated them seamlessly, connecting every thread into a compelling narrative of negligence, accountability, and human consequence. Nneka responded with equally elegant reframing, highlighting mitigating pressures, systemic ambiguity, and interpretive complexity, forcing jurors to balance evidence with judgment, fact with morality. The courtroom felt electric, each observer aware that the slightest nuance could pivot perception decisively. The tension ratcheted higher as visual evidence was projected: timelines, charts, and flowcharts tracing the consequences of missteps across departments. Adedayo's narrative emphasized causality and accountability, each piece of evidence reinforcing the larger picture of ethical responsibility. Nneka dissected each visual with meticulous care, demonstrating that intention, context, and systemic ambiguity could alter perception and meaning, keeping the jury suspended between two equally compelling interpretations. Every subtle expression, glance, or movement now carried amplified weight, as perception and psychological influence competed with facts for dominance. By afternoon, the courtroom had become a pressure cooker of intellect, strategy, and psychological warfare. Adedayo introduced a final witness, a regulatory expert capable of framing operational decisions within legal and ethical standards. His testimony, carefully guided, reinforced themes of responsibility and consequence without appearing confrontational. Nneka countered instantly, highlighting mitigating circumstances, procedural gray areas, and human interpretation, ensuring jurors remained engaged in weighing moral and factual considerations simultaneously. Each interaction became a microcosm of strategy, every word a potential pivot, every gesture a psychological lever. Late afternoon brought the most unexpected twist. A previously unexamined internal audit surfaced, revealing discrepancies in management reporting, decisions, and approvals. Adedayo seized the opportunity, integrating the new evidence seamlessly into his narrative, emphasizing accountability while maintaining the appearance of deliberate, measured strategy. Nneka anticipated the pivot perfectly, reframing discrepancies as procedural ambiguity, forcing the jury to question not only the evidence but the motives and pressures influencing each decision. The courtroom vibrated with intensity. Jurors, witnesses, and observers alike were caught in a web of intellect, strategy, and tension, every heartbeat synchronized with the unfolding drama. As evening approached, closing arguments commenced. Adedayo presented a masterful synthesis of testimony, evidence, and logical inference. weaving a narrative of ethical responsibility, human consequence, and professional accountability. He highlighted systemic failures, individual decisions, and cascading outcomes, connecting each element into a coherent, persuasive argument. Necker countered with equal sophistication, emphasizing nuance, intent, and human complexity, challenging jurors to navigate a layered landscape of morality, fact, and interpretation. The tension was almost tangible, each word resonating, each pause deliberate, the courtroom a theater where intellect and perception intertwine to dictate final judgment. Finally, the jury withdrew, leaving both lawyers in a rare moment of silence, the weight of anticipation pressing down. Adedayo reviewed every strategy employed, every counter anticipated, and every subtle maneuver observed, aware that the verdict would not only reflect the law but the mastery of perception and intellect. Necker remained composed, eyes calm, posture impeccable, exuding quiet confidence while mentally replaying every argument and counter, every strategic pivot, ensuring that no detail was overlooked. Outside, Lagos thrummed with life, traffic, music, and voices continuing oblivious to the cerebral battlefield within. A city alive, chaotic, indifferent, yet the outcomes of this day would ripple far beyond these walls, touching careers, reputations, and human lives in profound ways. When the jury returned, silence filled the room. The foreperson's eyes met Adedayo's and Necker's in turn, and the verdict was read. Every nuance, every observation, every strategy of the past weeks culminated in this moment. The room held its collective breath as jurors revealed their decision, a final twist in the intricate interplay of intellect, morality, and strategy. Adedayo's face betrayed a fleeting flicker of satisfaction. Necker's composure remained intact, though a glimmer of acknowledgement passed silently between them, a recognition that this contest of minds, influence, and perception had reached its climactic resolution. The gavel struck, echoing like a heartbeat through the courthouse, signaling not just the end of a case but the conclusion of a journey through ethics, strategy, and human complexity. Adedayo stepped into the corridor, mentally cataloguing lessons learned, anticipating future challenges, and savoring the rare victory that combined intellect, strategy, and psychological mastery. Necker followed, a silent nod acknowledging both rivalry and respect, a reminder that in the courts of Lagos, mastery of perception and intellect often outweighed brute fact. Outside, the city continued in its relentless rhythm, unaware that within these walls, a battle of minds had unfolded, a testament to strategy, morality, and the human condition, leaving outcomes that would resonate far beyond the echoes of this courthouse.